The cubs had never growled at anyone before Maisie arrived. That was what the head steward told her on her first morning at Ironvale Keep, his voice carrying the particular tone of a man who believed a warning was the same thing as a welcome. 3 young wolves, he said. Sons of fallen alphas, wards of the crown. Difficult, unpredictable. The last caretaker had lasted 11 days before requesting a transfer to the outer kitchens. The one before that had simply not returned after the midwinter feast. Maisie had nodded, folded her hands inside the sleeves of her gray wool cloak, and said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. She had spent 23 years perfecting the art of it. The keep smelled of pine resin and cold stone when she first crossed its threshold, the kind of cold that lived inside walls rather than outside them, the kind that no fireplace ever fully chased away. Torches lined the corridor in iron brackets, and the tapestries between them were old enough that the hunting scenes woven into their threads had faded to something almost gentle. Maisie noticed the worn places in the stone floor, the shallow grooves carved by generations of boots, and felt, strangely, that this was a place that had known many people pass through it. Few of them had stayed. She did not intend to stay either. She intended to earn enough silver to buy passage north, to the border towns where her younger brother Finn had last been seen before his letters stopped arriving 3 months ago. That was the entirety of her plan. Simple, contained. A thing she could hold in both hands without it spilling. The position of Omega caretaker to the Crown Wards was not a prestigious appointment. Omegas rarely received prestigious appointments. In the hierarchy of Ironvale, where alpha blood determined the architecture of every room, every meal, every title and permission, an Omega without a pack was a creature of margins. Maisie had learned to live in margins the way other people learn to live in houses, quietly, without complaint, taking up as little space as possible. She was shown to the nursery wing on the 2nd floor, a set of rooms that smelled of dried lavender and something wilder underneath, something that told her wolf instincts these rooms belonged to young predators, even before she opened the door. The 3 cubs were waiting for her. They stood in a row beside the cold hearth, with the specific posture of children who have agreed in advance to be difficult. The eldest, Roderick, was perhaps 9 years old, dark-haired, with the pale gray eyes of an alpha bloodline, and a jaw already set with the stubbornness that would someday make him either a great leader or an insufferable one. Beside him stood the twins, Bram and Cale, who were 7, red-haired and identical, except for the small scar above Cale's left brow. All 3 wore fine wool tunics. All 3 were watching her with the kind of focused attention that small wolves gave to things they were deciding whether to chase. Maisie set her travel sack down beside the door. "I'm Maisie," she said. Roderick growled. It was a low sound, surprisingly controlled for his age, a proper alpha warning rumble that vibrated faintly in the stones under her boots. Bram joined it a moment later. Cale, apparently waiting to see how she responded, kept his gray eyes fixed on her face. A more careful woman would have lowered her gaze, would have softened her shoulders and let her scent go passive and yielding, the way every Omega was taught to respond to dominance displays. The way every lesson about survival in this world insisted was correct. Maisie held their gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she growled back. Not a challenge. Not aggression. It was the growl of someone who had simply run out of patience for theater, a sound that said, "I see what you are doing, and I am not afraid of it, and I am also not impressed." It was the kind of sound her wolf had been making in her chest for years, without ever being given permission to come out of her throat. The room went very quiet. Cale blinked. Then he sat down on the hearthrug, crossed his legs, and looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of curiosity. Bram stopped growling. Roderick stared at her for a long moment. His gray eyes were unreadable. Then he said, very carefully, "The last woman screamed." "I am not the last woman," Maisie said. She had not planned to tell anyone about Finn. She had not planned to tell anyone anything. But on her 4th night at Ironvale Keep, when the cubs were asleep and the corridors were dark except for the guttering torches, She sat at the small writing table in her quarters and read his last letter again until the words stopped making sense. Maisie, I found something in the archive records. Something about our family name. I cannot write it here. Come north when you can. Come quickly if you can. I think we have been lied to. She had come as quickly as she could. The problem was that quickly required coin, and coin required work, and the only work available to an unaffiliated Omega in the Central Territories of Velmore was domestic service, or worse. The caretaker position had seemed like fortune. Enough silver in 3 months to buy a seat on a merchant caravan heading north. Enough time to keep her head down, do her work, and not draw attention. She folded the letter and tucked it back into the inner pocket of her cloak, which she kept hung on the peg beside her bed, even when she slept, close enough to reach in the dark. She had been drawing attention since the moment she growled at those cubs. Word moved through a keep the way smoke moved through corridors, finding every gap, rising into every upper room. By the second morning, the kitchen servants were watching her differently. By the third, the head steward had come to observe her during the cubs' morning lesson in the great hall, standing at the far end with his arms folded, his expression caught between disapproval and reluctant reassessment. Omegas did not growl at young alphas. It was simply not done. The cubs, for their part, had not attempted another dominance display. Roderick had, instead, begun asking her questions. Careful questions, testing ones, the kind a child asked when he was deciding whether an adult was worth taking seriously. What does the third moon of autumn mean for a wolf's shift cycle? Why does pine resin appear in healing poultices? Can an omega track scent as well as an alpha? She answered each question honestly, which seemed to surprise him more than any growl could have. She was teaching Cale how to tie a proper knot with a length of cord on the 5th evening, Bram watching with his chin on his hands, when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not the hurried shuffle of servants, not the measured pace of guards. Something else entirely. A stride that moved without announcing itself. The way a large predator moved through its own territory without needing to claim it out loud. The door did not open. The footsteps paused outside it. Maisie's wolf went very still inside her. The particular stillness of an animal that has suddenly become aware of something much larger in the same forest. Then the footsteps moved on. Roderick had looked up from the cord lesson. He was watching her face. That was the king, he said. Maisie kept her eyes on the knot she was tying. Her hands did not shake. She was proud of that afterward. Does he often walk this corridor? She asked. Roderick's gray eyes were thoughtful. He never walks this corridor, he said. She found the letter on the 6th morning. It was not addressed to her. It was tucked into the lining of her travel sack, in the inner compartment she had sewn shut herself. The one that contained Finn's letters, and the small iron key to their childhood home in the northern village of Ashenmere. She had not touched that compartment since arriving. She had no reason to. She had been careful. The letter was already open. The seal was one she recognized, not from her own life, but from documents she had seen during her 2 years as a record-keeper's assistant in the town of Caldervane. The crescent and chain mark of Lord Aldrich Voss, the regional governor of the Northern Territories. She read it once. Then she read it again, more slowly, because the first reading had not been possible to fully absorb. The girl is in Ironvale. She does not know what her bloodline carries. Keep her in the position until the council meeting at the new moon. She must not reach the Northern Archives before the vote. If she attempts to leave, she is not to be allowed passage, by any means. The words "by any means" were underlined, twice. Maisie stood in the gray morning light of her small room, the letter in her hands, and felt the floor shift beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the stones. Someone had placed her here. Someone had arranged this position, this keep, this specific assignment that kept her exactly far enough from the northern border that she could not reach Finn, could not reach the archives he had written about, could not arrive before whatever vote was scheduled at the new moon. She had thought she was choosing this path. She had thought the fortunate timing of the posting was simply fortune. She had been steered like a cart horse, with patience and care, down a road someone else had built. She did not know how long she stood there. Long enough for the candle on her writing table to burn another inch. Long enough for the cold of the stone floor to work up through the soles of her boots. Then she folded the letter, put it inside her cloak, picked up her travel sack. She had 3 silver coins and no idea what her bloodline carried. She walked to the door, opened it, and found the King of Ironvale standing in the corridor. He was larger than she had expected. That was her first thought, which embarrassed her later, because it was not a useful thought, and she was a person who valued useful thoughts. But there was no preparing for the sheer physical presence of Evander, King of Velmore, Alpha King of the Ironvale territories, standing 4 feet away in a torchlit corridor at dawn with his dark braids falling over one shoulder, and his ice-blue eyes fixed on her face as though he had been waiting for exactly this moment and was not surprised it had arrived. He wore leather armor over a dark tunic, the cross straps of his chest harness, buckled with the quiet efficiency of a man who dressed for function rather than ceremony. A fur mantle lay across his shoulders, black as crow feathers. There was a faint scar along his jaw, a thin pale line that caught the torchlight when he turned his head slightly, which he did now, looking from her face to the travel sack in her hand. The corridor was empty except for them. Maisie's wolf was doing something complicated inside her chest. Not fear, exactly. Something adjacent to it, something that had fear as one of its ingredients but also contained other things she did not have names for yet. She lowered her gaze. It was reflex, the Omega instinct, the thing her body did before her mind could intervene. But she caught herself before it became a full submission posture, brought her eyes back up to the middle distance, not quite meeting his, not quite yielding either. "You are leaving," he said. His voice was low and even, not a question, not an accusation, simply an observation delivered with the calm of a man who said only what he had already confirmed to be true. "I have urgent business in the north," she said. "You have been in this position 6 days. "Yes." A pause. The torch nearest to them guttered in a draft from somewhere above, and the shadow it cast moved across the stones between them like something alive. "The cubs slept through the night for the first time since autumn," he said. "All 3 of them." Maisie said nothing. She was aware, with the precision of someone tracking multiple dangers at once, that she was holding a letter in her cloak that implicated at least one person connected to this keep in a conspiracy to detain her. She did not know how many people that implicated. She did not know if it implicated the man standing in front of her. She knew only that she could not stay. "I must go," she said. "I apologize for the inconvenience to the household." She moved a step past him. He did not block her path. He did not reach for her arm or shift his weight to cut off her exit. He simply said quietly, "Someone placed that posting notice in the Southern Guild records 3 weeks before you found it." Maisie stopped. Her heart was doing something loud and unhelpful. She turned back slowly. The king's ice-blue eyes were steady. There was no performance in his expression, no attempt to appear more or less than what he was. He was watching her the way she had noticed Roderick watching her, with the patient attention of someone assembling information before speaking. "I had my steward investigate the origin of the posting notice," he said, "after the 4th day. "Why the 4th day?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Something shifted very slightly in his expression, not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. "Because on the 4th day," Cale laughed, he said. "He has not laughed since his father died." The words landed somewhere in her chest that she had not expected them to reach. She stood in the corridor with her travel sack in her hand and the letter against her ribs, and the dawn light beginning to gray the narrow window at the far end of the passage, and she made herself think clearly. He knew the posting had been arranged. He had investigated it himself. He had not said anything to her for 2 days after learning it, which meant he had been watching, deciding, determining something about her before revealing his hand. That was either the behavior of a careful man or the behavior of a dangerous one. Possibly both. "What did your steward find?" she asked. "The notice was filed under a guild seal that belongs to a merchant house in Caldervane," he said. "A merchant house with known ties to Lord Aldrich Voss." The name hit her like cold water. She reached into her cloak and held out the letter. He took it, read it without changing expression, which told her either that he had extraordinary control or that none of this was new information. When he finished, he folded it with the same care she had used and held it out to her. "Keep it," he said. "You will need it." "For what?" "Evidence," he said simply, "when the time comes." She did not leave that morning. She told herself it was pragmatism. The northern roads were dangerous for a lone Omega without pack protection, and she had 3 silver coins and no weapon, and no clear knowledge of what she was walking toward. She told herself that remaining at Iron Vale for a few more days while she gathered information was the intelligent choice, not a decision shaped by the unsettling steadiness of the king's voice, or the fact that he had noticed Cale laughing. She went back to the nursery wing. She tied more knots with Cale. She corrected Roderick's grip on a practice blade, which earned her a startled look from the weapons tutor and a small nod of acknowledgement from Roderick himself. She sat beside Bram while he struggled through a passage in the old pack histories, reading aloud without impatience, letting him find the words himself. In the evenings, she sat at her writing table and thought about Finn. Come quickly if you can. I think we have been lied to. What had he found in the archives? What did their family name carry that Lord Aldrich Voss needed suppressed before a council vote at the new moon? Their parents had been ordinary people, as far as she had ever known. Their father, a wool merchant. Their mother, a healer's apprentice who had died of fever when Maisie was 12 and Finn was 8. They had no lands, no title, no pack affiliation. They were unaffiliated Omegas from a border village, which was as unremarkable as it was possible to be in Velmore. Except that someone powerful was very interested in keeping her away from the northern archives, which meant there was something in those archives about her that she did not know. On the 8th evening, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find not the king, but a young woman in the gray dress and white apron of a senior household servant, carrying a tray with a covered dish and a small clay cup of something that smelled of honey and dried herbs. "His Majesty's compliments," the woman said, and held out the tray. Maisie looked at the tray, then at the woman. "Did he say anything else?" The woman hesitated. "He said, 'You looked like you had not eaten properly since arriving.'" A pause. "And that the cup is chamomile and valerian, not a sleeping draught. He said you would want to know that specifically." Maisie stared at her for a moment. Then she took the tray. She stood at her window and ate, looking out at the inner courtyard below where 2 guards were changing at the gate, their breath visible in the cold air. The food was simple and warm. The chamomile smelled clean. She drank it slowly, and hated how much she needed it, and hated more how it felt to have someone notice that she needed it at all. She had been invisible for so long. It was disorienting to be seen. The dream came that night without warning. She had not had a vision dream since she was 16, when she had dreamed her father's horse would throw him 3 days before it happened. And she had told him, and he had laughed, and she had spent the following years deciding the dream had been coincidence. She did not have visions. She was an Omega with no pack, no special blood, no gift beyond the ability to be quiet in rooms where being quiet was survival. But the dream was not quiet. She stood in a stone hall she did not recognize, vast and cold, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. The walls were hung with banners she could not read. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, stood a chair carved from dark wood, and in the chair sat a woman. The woman was old. Her hair was white and unbound, falling past her shoulders in the manner of a wolf elder performing a formal rite. Her eyes were the color of winter sky. When she looked at Maisie across the length of that impossible hall, Maisie felt the look in her spine. Your name is not what you were given, the woman said. Maisie opened her mouth to speak. Your blood is not what you were told, the woman said. And the archive Finn found contains a record that Aldrich Voss has spent 17 years trying to destroy. What record? Maisie said. The woman rose from the chair. She was taller than seemed possible. Around her neck hung a pendant, a crescent moon inside a ring of thorns. And when she moved, it caught light that had no visible source. Your mother did not die of fever, the woman said. Maisie woke to the sound of her own sharp breath and the smell of cold ash from a dead hearth, her hands gripping the edge of the mattress hard enough to whiten her knuckles. The candle on the table had burned to nothing. Outside in the corridor, she heard footsteps. The same stride as before, unhurried, present. She did not know whether that frightened her or steadied her. She pressed both hands flat against the mattress and stared at the ceiling and thought, Your mother did not die of fever. And underneath that thought, quieter and more dangerous, then what did she die of? And who decided I should never know? She did not tell the king about the dream. She told herself that was also pragmatism. A vision that arrived without invitation, spoken by a woman she had never seen, in a hall that existed nowhere she had ever been. That was not information. That was confusion wearing the shape of information. She needed facts, documents. The kind of truth that could be held in two hands and shown to someone else without them questioning her sanity. But the dream sat inside her chest like an ember that refused to go cold. And every time she moved through her morning tasks, stoking the hearth in the nursery, overseeing Roderick's reading, walking the twins through the courtyard for their midday air, she felt the old woman's words following her like a second shadow. Your mother did not die of fever. Her mother's name had been Serene. She had been small and fair-haired, with the kind of quietness that Maisie had always assumed she had inherited, though she could not now be certain inheritance was the right word for something that might have been taught. Serene had smelled of dried lavender and beeswax. She had hummed while she worked. She had died in the third week of a cold autumn when Maisie was 12, and the healer had said it was the fever that took her, the same fever that had moved through their village that season and taken 4 others. 4 others who were not her mother's age. 4 others who had no particular reason to die. Maisie had been a child. Children accepted what adults told them because they had no architecture yet for doubting it. She was not a child now. On the 9th morning, she went to the keep's small library, which occupied 2 connected rooms on the eastern side of the 2nd floor, and smelled powerfully of old vellum and the particular dusty sweetness of manuscripts that had not been opened in a long time. The archivist, an elderly beta named Oswin, with ink-stained fingers and the mildly suspicious expression of a man who preferred books to people, looked up when she entered. I need the regional census records for the northern border territories, she said, specifically the village of Ashenmere, 15 years ago. Oswin looked at her over a set of spectacles that had been repaired with a piece of wire. Those are restricted holdings. I understand. I'm asking for access. Access requires authorization from a senior household member. Then I will need to obtain that, she said. She left the library and walked downstairs with the even, contained stride she used when she was preventing herself from doing something she would regret. And she sent a message through the junior steward to the king, requesting a brief audience at his earliest convenience, because she was an Omega caretaker in a royal keep, and she did not simply walk into the Alpha King's study unannounced, regardless of what she had dreamed and what letter she was carrying, and how loudly the thing in her chest was insisting that time was running short. The response came back within the hour. Now, it said. 1 word. No honorifics. She could not decide if that was efficiency or arrogance, and she put on her cloak and climbed the stairs to the northern tower. His study smelled of leather and pine resin, and something metallic underneath. The cold, clean scent of a man who spent time outdoors in all weather. Maps covered most of the large central table, weighted at the corners with smooth river stones. Shelves of bound records lined 2 walls. A fire burned in the hearth at the far end, which was the warmest Maisie had been in 9 days. Evander was standing at the table when she entered, looking at a map of the Northern Territories. He did not look up immediately, which she had begun to understand was not inattention, but a particular form of courtesy. He was giving her time to enter the room on her own terms, to find her footing before his eyes found her. She found, against her better judgment, that she appreciated it. "You want access to the census records," he said, when she had come to stand on the opposite side of the table. "I want to know what my family name carries that Lord Aldrich Voss needs buried before the new moon." He looked up then. His ice-blue eyes moved over her face with the careful attention she was becoming accustomed to, the gaze of a man who read expressions the way scholars read manuscripts, looking for what was written between the lines. "What do you know about the blood compact of Ashenmere?" he asked. The name meant nothing to her. And then, somewhere below the nothing, the faintest tremor of recognition, the way a place name sounds familiar in a dream, even when you have never visited it. "Nothing," she said. He moved to the shelf behind him and drew out a bound record, setting it on the table between them. The cover was dark with age, the edges soft with handling. When she opened it, the script inside was formal and precise, the kind used in official council documents. 40 years ago, he said, the Northern Border Territories were not part of Velmore. They were a separate holding, governed by a bloodline with old Omega roots, which is unusual in this kingdom, as you know. That bloodline signed a compact with the Crown that granted certain rights and protections to unaffiliated Omegas throughout the territory. Rights to land, to pack independent trade, to testimony before the council. Maisie read the document without speaking. The compact was written in dense formal language, but the meaning was clear enough. It was a significant piece of legislation. It would, if enforced, change the position of unaffiliated Omegas in Velmore substantially. "Why is it not enforced?" she asked. "Because the bloodline that signed it was declared extinct 17 years ago," he said. "Without a living heir to the compact, the document has no legal advocate before the council. It exists, but cannot be acted upon." 17 years. Finn's letter. Something about our family name. "I think we have been lied to." The ember in her chest flared. "Who declared the bloodline extinct?" she asked, though she already knew the shape of the answer. "Lord Aldrich Voss," Evander said, "in his capacity as regional governor of the Northern Territories." She sat down in the chair beside the table without being invited to, because her legs had made the decision before her manners could intervene. The king said nothing about it. He moved to the hearth and added a piece of wood to the fire, and remained standing there, with his back half turned, giving her space to absorb what she had just been told. "Your blood is not what you were told." Her mother, small and fair-haired and smelling of lavender, humming in the kitchen of a house in Ashenmere. Her mother, who had died at 34 of a fever that the healer had confirmed, and the village had mourned, and Maisie had believed without question for 11 years. Her mother, whose bloodline someone had gone to significant trouble to erase. "You already knew this," she said. Not an accusation, an observation. "I suspected it," he said. "When my steward traced the guild seal on your posting notice back to Voss, I had my own archivist review the compact records. Your family name appears in the secondary witness documents from the original signing. A witness who was present at the compact ceremony holds a recognized standing in the court record, even if that standing has been dormant. That's why he needs me detained," she said. "Before the council vote at the new moon. There is a vote scheduled to dissolve the compact permanently," Evander said, turning from the fire. "Voss has been working toward it for years. Once dissolved, there is no mechanism to revisit it. The rights it protects disappear, and any unaffiliated Omegas who have been living under those protections in the Northern Territories lose their standing entirely. And if someone with documented standing in the compact appears before the council before that vote, the dissolution cannot proceed without addressing that claim first," he said. The vote must be postponed. The claim must be examined. She pressed both hands flat on the surface of the table and breathed carefully. The fire popped behind him. Outside the high window, a crow called once and went silent. "My brother found the witness record in the Northern Archives," she said. "That's what his letter meant. He found our family name in the compact documents." "Almost certainly." "And now he has gone silent." The king's expression did not change, but something shifted in it. The quality of his attention altered, became more focused, the way a wolf's attention shifted when a threat moved from abstract to specific. "How long since his last letter?" he asked. 3 months, she said. "He was in the archive town of Veldmore's Rest when he wrote it." "Veldmore's Rest is under Voss's direct jurisdiction," he said quietly. The silence that followed that statement was the kind that had weight to it. Maisie stood up from the chair. Her hands were steady. She noticed that distantly and was grateful for it, because the rest of her was not steady at all, was in fact operating at the precise edge of what she could contain without it becoming something visible and ungovernable. "I need to go north," she said. "Yes," he said. "I need to reach the archives before the new moon." "Yes, and I need to find my brother." He looked at her across the table with his ice-blue eyes and the firelight moving behind him and said, "You will not go alone." And she opened her mouth to tell him that she did not require an escort, that she was capable of managing her own affairs, that she had been doing so since she was 12 years old, and a healer had told her that her mother was dead, and she had to be the one to explain it to Finn, because there was no one else. Then she thought about 3 silver coins, the northern roads in autumn, Aldrich Voss's letter with by any means underlined twice. She closed her mouth. "When do we leave?" she asked. Something in his expression shifted again. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Something that looked, briefly, like relief. "Tomorrow," he said. "Before first light." They rode out before the sky had decided what color it intended to be. Maisie had slept perhaps 3 hours, which was 2 more than she had expected. She had spent the remaining darkness sitting at her writing table with Finn's letter and the letter from Voss laid side by side, reading them in alternation until the words stopped being words and became simply the shape of a problem she needed to solve. At some point, she had folded both letters into the inner pocket of her cloak and allowed herself to close her eyes. And the old woman from the dream had not returned, which she chose to interpret as mercy rather than absence. The king's party was small by design. 2 of his senior guards, a tracker named Bjork, who smelled of pine and moved with the silence of someone who had spent years in forest work, and a healer's assistant carrying a satchel of herbs and wrapped cloth. No banners, no livery that announced the crown. 4 horses, solid and dark, their breath clouding in the cold morning air as Maisie crossed the inner courtyard and found them already saddled and waiting. Evander was checking the straps on his horse's bridle when she arrived. He glanced at her travel sack, then at her boots, which were good leather, but not made for extended riding. "There are riding boots in the left saddlebag," he said. "Have the healer's assistant wrap your ankles before we mount. The northern road has stones." She did not thank him. She was not ready to thank him for things, because thanking him felt like the beginning of trusting him, and trusting him felt like the beginning of something she did not have the map for yet. But she went to the saddlebag and found the boots, which were soft dark leather and fit well enough, and she sat on the mounting block and let the healer's assistant, a quiet young woman named Wren, wrap her ankles with linen while the courtyard remained dark and silent around them. When she was mounted, and the gate was opening, and the cold air of the road hit her face, she thought of Roderick standing in the nursery doorway the previous evening, gray eyes watchful, asking her in a voice carefully constructed to sound like it did not matter, "Will you come back?" She had told him the truth, which was that she did not know. He had nodded once, with the dignity of a child who had already learned not to count on things, and she had felt the weight of that nod in her chest for the rest of the night. The northern road through Velmore's interior was old and wide, made of fitted stone laid by a civilization 2 kingdoms back, now partially overgrown at the edges, where autumn had brought the forest in closer. The trees on either side were tall and dark-barked, their canopies stripped to skeleton branches by the season, and through those branches the sky moved in shades of pewter and cold white as the morning arrived without warmth. They rode in relative silence, which suited Maisie. Evander rode slightly ahead, which she noticed was not a dominance positioning, but a practical one. He was the strongest wolf in the party, and he took the forward position as a matter of function, not declaration. Bjork fell to the rear. Maisie rode in the middle beside Wren, who had the good instinct to ask no questions. By midday they had covered significant ground. They stopped at a wayside well to water the horses, and Wren produced bread and dried meat from a pack, and they ate standing, which Maisie preferred to the formality of a laid cloth and the expectations that came with it. Evander came to stand beside her while she ate. Not close enough to crowd, close enough to speak quietly. The archive at Veldmore's Rest is held by a guild of record keepers who answer to the regional governor, he said. Under Voss, access has become increasingly restricted in the past decade. We will need to enter under a purpose that does not identify you by name. What purpose? I will present you as a member of my household staff, conducting genealogical research on behalf of the crown. He paused. It is not entirely untrue. I am a caretaker for your wards, she said. You are, he said, and the crown has an interest in the compact documents, which is genuine. The framing does not require deception, only selective presentation. She looked at him sideways. The scar along his jaw was more visible in daylight, a clean, pale line that spoke of something fast and close. She had not asked about it and did not intend to. You have done this before, she said, moved through territory under cover. I have done many things before, he said, in the tone of a man who considered his own history less interesting than the problem currently in front of him. She almost smiled. She caught it before it arrived. They reached the border of the northern territories as the sun was setting, which meant crossing under a gatehouse staffed by guards in the governor's colors, deep green and iron gray. Maisie kept her hood up and her eyes forward, and let Evander present their party's papers at the gate, and she watched the guard's face when he looked at the seal on the documents, the small flinch of involuntary deference that alpha authority produced, even in men who served other masters. The gate opened. Veldmore's Rest was another half-day's ride into the territory, but they did not push on into darkness. Evander chose a traveler's inn at the border settlement, a low-beamed building that smelled of wood smoke and mutton and the particular exhaustion of a place where people slept because they were too tired to worry about comfort. The innkeeper asked no questions. The rooms were small and cold, with straw mattresses and wool blankets that had been washed recently enough that they smelled of soap rather than the people before. Maisie sat on the edge of her mattress and listened to the building settle around her. Through the wall, she could hear the low rhythm of Evander's voice as he spoke to Bjork, too quiet to make out the words. She could hear the wind finding gaps in the shutters. She could hear her own breathing, which was steadier than she deserved. She took out Finn's letter and read it one more time in the light of the single tallow candle. I think we have been lied to. She was beginning to understand the precise dimensions of that lie. What she did not yet understand was how far it extended. Whether it had touched only Lord Voss, or whether it had roots deeper than one regional governor with political ambitions and a council vote to protect. A knock at her door. 3 even taps. She recognized the pattern from the previous 2 times he had knocked on doors in her presence. Even, unhurried, the knock of someone who would wait. She opened the door. Evander stood in the narrow corridor with 2 clay cups, which he held out to her. She took one. Chamomile again. She could smell it before it reached her hands. There is something you should know before we reach the archive tomorrow, he said. She wrapped both hands around the cup. Tell me. My own archivist found a second reference to your family name in the compact documents, he said, Not in the witness record. In the body of the compact itself. She went still. The bloodline that signed the compact, he said carefully, did not simply witness it. They were not bystanders. The compact was written to protect a specific lineage, an Omega bloodline that the council records describe as carrying a rare trait. He paused. The records call it the quiet site. The corridor was very still. The candle in her room threw his shadow large and uneven across the far wall. Prophetic dreaming, she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. His eyes found hers directly. Among other things, he said, yes. She thought of a dream she had dismissed at 16. She thought of an old woman in a stone hall with white hair and winter sky eyes. She thought of the way she had known, 3 seconds before the gate guard looked up from those papers, exactly what expression his face would carry. She thought of all the years she had spent deciding that the things she sometimes knew before she should know them were coincidence. Voss knew, she said. He knew what the bloodline carried. That's why declaring it extinct wasn't just about the compact. It was about making sure no one with the quiet sight had legal standing in Velmore. A wolf who can see what others cannot, Evander said quietly, is a significant threat to men who depend on secrets. The cup was warm in her hands. The chamomile smelled clean and ordinary in a corridor that had become suddenly vast with implication. My mother, she said. I believe she was the last acknowledged carrier, he said. Before you. The word before landed quietly and did not leave. Maisie looked down at the cup in her hands. Then she looked back up at the King of Velmore, who was standing in a traveler's inn corridor in the northern border territories, with no banner and no ceremony, holding a clay cup of chamomile and looking at her with eyes that were not asking for anything she had not already decided to give. I dreamed of an old woman, she said. The night before, I asked to see the census records. She told me my mother did not die of fever. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting to hear the shape of something he had already partially assembled. What else did she tell you? He asked. That the archive contains a record Voss has spent 17 years trying to destroy, she said. I believe that record is my mother's death, the real cause of it, and possibly Finn's location. A long silence. Wind moved through the shutters at the end of the corridor. Then we reached the archive at first light, he said. He did not tell her everything would be well. He did not offer reassurance that she had not asked for. He simply stood there with the steadiness of something that did not require the weather to be good in order to remain standing, and she found that more useful than any promise would have been. She went back inside. She drank the chamomile. She lay down on the straw mattress with her cloak around her and her hand over the letters in the inner pocket. And for the first time in 3 months, she did not lie awake counting the hours until she could move again. She slept, and the old woman did not come, and the dark was simply dark, and that was enough. Veldmore's rest woke slowly, the way border towns woke, with one eye open and the other still watching the dark. Maisie was dressed and waiting in the inn's lower hall before the kitchen fire had fully caught, her cloak fastened, her travel sack over one shoulder, both letters inside her cloak, where she could feel them with every breath. Wren appeared shortly after with bread and a skin of water. Beork was already outside with the horses. Evander came down last, and when he crossed the hall toward her, she noticed that he had changed into simpler clothes, a plain dark tunic under the leather chest harness, the fur mantle left behind. He looked less like a king, and more like a man who intended to move quickly through spaces where kings were not welcome. She approved of that without saying so. The archive of Veldmore's Rest occupied a stone building near the center of the settlement, 2 stories tall with narrow windows and a heavy oak door banded in iron. A guild seal above the lintel, the open bookmark of the record keepers, had been partially obscured by a newer carving beneath it, the crescent and chain of Lord Aldrich Voss. Maisie looked at that seal and felt something hard and specific settle in her chest. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more useful than anger. The record keeper on duty was a thin man in his middle years, with the wary eyes of someone accustomed to turning people away. He looked at Evander's documents with the focused attention of a man searching for a reason to refuse, and found none, and his mouth thinned in the way of a man who had hoped for a reason and was now deprived of one. They were shown to the lower archive room, which was cold and smelled overwhelmingly of old vellum and the particular sharpness of iron gall ink. Shelves reached from floor to ceiling on 3 walls. The record keeper indicated the general region of the compact-era holdings and retreated to the doorway, where he remained, watching. Evander moved to the shelves without hesitation. Maisie followed. They worked in silence, which was the only way she knew how to search for things that mattered. She moved through the bound volumes by date and territory, her fingers reading the spines the way she had learned to read shelves during her 2 years as a record-keeper's assistant, by feel as much as by sight. Evander worked the upper shelves, reaching without difficulty for volumes she would have needed a step stool to access, passing them down to her when the dates aligned. 40 minutes. 50. The record keeper shifted in the doorway, cleared his throat once. Neither of them looked up, and then Maisie's fingers found a volume that had been reshelved incorrectly, spine inward, its title invisible. The kind of misfiling that happened accidentally, or the kind that was done deliberately by someone who needed a document to be findable by the person who knew to look for it, but not by a casual search. She pulled it out. The cover read, Supplementary Witness Records, Blood Compact of Ashenmere, Northern Territories. Below that, in a different hand, more recent ink, Holdings declared closed by order of the regional governor. Her hands did not shake. She opened it. The first pages were formal witness documentation, names and pack affiliations, and the flowing signature marks of the compact's original signatories. She turned through them carefully, and there, on the 7th page, written in the precise small hand of a thorough record keeper, was her mother's name, Seren of Ashenmere. Omega, unaffiliated. Carrier of the Quiet Sight, 3rd generation documented. Primary bloodline heir to compact protections. Present at signing as witness, and named beneficiary. Named beneficiary. Not simply a witness. Her mother had been the person the compact was written to protect most directly, a carrier of the quiet sight in a kingdom that had increasingly treated such gifts as threats rather than assets. She turned the page. A second document, filed behind the witness record. Newer paper, darker ink. The crescent and chain seal pressed into the bottom corner in dark wax. Death record, Seren of Ashenmere. Cause, administered infusion of bloodbane root, compound preparation. Date recorded by regional healer under instruction of the governor's office. Manner recorded publicly as fever. The archive room was very quiet. Maisie read the document twice. The words did not change on the second reading. They were the same words, precise and bureaucratic and completely damning, the kind of record that existed because someone in the governor's office had been thorough enough to document the truth, even while publicly announcing a lie, the way careful men sometimes preserved evidence of their own crimes in the belief that they would never be called to account for them. Bloodbane root, a compound preparation, administered. Her mother had not died of fever. Her mother had been poisoned by order of Lord Aldrich Voss, 17 years ago, because she was the primary heir to compact protections and a documented carrier of the quiet sight, and Voss had needed the bloodline to end. Maisie set the document down on the reading table with great care. She placed both hands flat on the wood surface. She breathed in and out and in again. Evander had come to stand beside her. He had read it over her shoulder. She understood, because when she looked up, his eyes were not on the document anymore. They were on her face. "There is a 3rd page," he said quietly. She looked down. The 3rd page was not a formal record. It was a letter, handwritten, in a script she recognized with a shock that moved through her like cold water striking stone. It was Finn's handwriting. Maisie, if you have found this, then you found the archive and you are safe enough to be reading. I am leaving this here because I cannot send it without Voss knowing. I found the death record 3 months ago. I tried to leave the territory to reach you and was stopped at the southern gate. They have not harmed me. I am being held at the governor's estate under pretense of an outstanding debt claim, which does not exist. I am well. Do not come for me alone. The document you are holding is enough to bring before the Crown Council. Take it to Ironvale. Find someone with authority who is not under Voss's influence. I love you. Do not do anything reckless. At the bottom, underlined twice in the manner of a younger brother who knew his sister well. I mean it, Maisie. Not reckless. She pressed her hand over the letter and laughed, which was not what she had expected to do. A short sound that was also almost something else entirely. And she felt the burning behind her eyes that she refused to allow further progress. Evander's hand came to rest beside hers on the table, not covering it, simply present. The way he was present, she was beginning to understand, without requiring her to acknowledge it. The governor's estate, he said. He is alive, she said. Yes. He is an hour's ride from here, if the estate is where I think it is. It is, he said. I know the road. They rode hard. Bjork went ahead to scout the estate's outer perimeter, returning with the information that the holding was guarded by 8 men in governor's colors, and that a young man matching Finn's description had been seen in the eastern courtyard that morning, apparently in reasonable health, and engaged in an argument with one of the guards about the quality of his breakfast, which Maisie found so specifically characteristic of her brother that she had to press her lips together very hard for a moment. Evander did not storm the gates. He rode to them and presented his seal, the actual royal seal this time, gold and unambiguous, and told the guard captain in a voice so quiet and so absolutely certain that it left no architecture for refusal, that he was here for the unlawfully detained citizen within, and that any man who obstructed the crown's authority in this matter would answer for it before the full council. The gates opened. Finn was 26 years old, lean and fair-haired like their mother, with ink-stained fingers and the particular expression of a man who had been waiting for rescue while simultaneously composing arguments for why rescue was taking too long. When he walked out of the eastern wing and saw Maisie crossing the courtyard toward him, his face did something complicated, and then settled into relief, so complete, it changed the shape of him entirely. She crossed the distance and took hold of both his arms and looked at him carefully, the way she had been looking at him since he was 8 years old, and she needed to confirm he was in one piece. Not reckless, he said, looking past her at the Alpha King of Velmore, standing at the courtyard gate, with 2 guards and an expression of calm authority that was making every man in governor's colors very still. You brought the king. I brought resources, she said. That is the king. He had horses. Finn looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Evander again. Then back at her, with the eyes of a younger brother who had known her for 23 years and could read the particular quality of her silences. Maisie, he said. We need to go, she said. We have a council vote to stop. They reached Ironvale 3 days later. The new moon was 4 days out. Enough time, barely, if the documents were presented formally and the petition for postponement was filed through the correct channels before Voss's allies could organize a counter-argument. Evander moved through the procedural machinery of the Crown Council with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything, speaking to the right people in the right order, never raising his voice, never making threats that were not already contained in the documents themselves. The death record of Seren of Ashenmere, filed in Voss's own archive under his own seal, with the true cause of death recorded in the regional healer's own hand, was presented before the council 3 days before the vote. Aldrich Voss was in the council chamber when it was read aloud. Maisie watched his face from the gallery above, standing between Finn and Wren, and she saw the precise moment when he understood that the document he had always believed was safely buried had been present in his own archive for 17 years, waiting. The color left his face in a way that had nothing theatrical about it. It was simply the color of a man watching the architecture of 17 years of careful construction come apart in the time it took a council reader to reach the bottom of a page. The vote was postponed. An investigation was opened. Lord Aldrich Voss was removed from his position as regional governor pending the outcome, his authority suspended by crown order before he left the chamber. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say that the documents had not already said more clearly. The cubs were in the nursery when Maisie returned to Iron Vale Keep that evening. Roderick was sitting by the hearth with a book open on his knees, pretending to read it, his gray eyes tracking the door at intervals that he was trying to make less obvious than they were. Bram and Cale were on the hearthrug with a length of cord between them, attempting the knot she had taught them, and arguing about which end went over and which went under. When she opened the door, Roderick looked up. He did not say anything. He closed the book, set it aside, and returned his gaze to the fire, which was the carefully constructed dignity of a 9-year-old alpha who had decided not to let his relief be visible. Cale held up his cord. "I got it," he said. She crossed the room, looked at the knot, and found it perfect. "You did," she said. She found Evander in the library later that night, standing at the table with the compact documents spread before him, reading by candlelight. She had not planned to come. She had been walking back from Finn's room, where she had sat for 2 hours while her brother talked without stopping about everything he had found in the archive, and everything he intended to document, and everything he believed needed to change about how unaffiliated Omegas were treated in the Northern Territories. And she had listened to all of it with the patient attention she gave to things that mattered, and when she left him, he was already writing. She had walked past the library door. Then she had stopped. Then she had gone in. Evander looked up when she entered. He waited. She came to stand on the opposite side of the table, which was where she always stood, because the table between them was a thing she had put there, and she was not ready to remove it, and he had never once moved to remove it himself. "The council will uphold the compact," she said. "Yes," he said. "The investigation will take months, but the legal outcome is not in question. The document is unambiguous. The protections for unaffiliated Omegas in the Northern Territories will be enforced," he said. "And expanded, if the petition Finn is drafting says what I believe it will say." She looked at the documents on the table. Her mother's name was visible on the open page, in the small, precise hand of a record keeper who had written the truth because record keepers wrote what was true and filed it and trusted that the filing was the protection. He had not been wrong. It had simply taken 17 years and a daughter who refused to stay where she was placed. "I dreamed of her once," Maisie said. "When I was 16, I dreamed my father's horse would throw him, and I told him, and he did not believe me. And I spent years deciding the dream had been coincidence." Evander was quiet, listening the way he listened, with his whole attention, and without the urge to fill the silence with reassurance. "I was not wrong," she said, "about the horse. I was not wrong about any of it. I have simply been telling myself I was, because being wrong was safer than being what I apparently am. A woman with the quiet sight," he said. "In a kingdom that has spent 17 years pretending that bloodline does not exist." "It exists," she said. "It does," he said. "And it is recognized now in the council record. Whatever else the investigation produces, that recognition is already filed. It cannot be unfiled." She looked up at him across the table. The candlelight moved between them, throwing everything into warm, unsteady gold, and she thought of a long corridor, and chamomile tea, and a man who had noticed that a child laughed, and had found that significant enough to investigate. She thought of a gate in the northern border, and a voice so quiet and so certain that it left no room for refusal. She thought of a hand placed beside hers on a reading table, not covering it, simply present. She thought of her mother, of Finn, of Roderick sitting by the fire pretending not to watch the door. She thought of the old woman in the dream, who had told her the truth before she was ready to hear it. because the truth was coming, regardless of readiness. She moved around the end of the table. She did not have words for what she wanted to say, which was unusual for her, and she stood in front of him with the candlelight between them and said the only true thing she could find at that exact moment. "I did not trust you." "I know," he said. "I am not certain I trust easily," she said. "I am not certain I know how." "You do," he said. "You trusted Finn's letter enough to take a position in a strange keep for a man you had never met. You trusted 3 cubs enough to growl back at them instead of flinching. You trusted the documents enough to walk into a council chamber and let them speak." He paused. "You are not someone who does not know how to trust. You are someone who has been given very poor material to practice with." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The mate bond." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, became very still. The stillness of a man who has been carrying something carefully for a long time and has just been asked to set it down. "I have felt it since the second morning," he said. "I did not intend to say anything until you were ready. I am still not saying anything. I am simply answering the question you asked." "I am asking," she said. "I know," he said. The candle between them burned without moving. The library was warm and smelled of leather and old vellum and pine resin and the clean cold night outside the high windows, and Maisie, who had spent 23 years being quiet in rooms where quietness was survival, made a choice that was not about survival at all. She took his hand. He closed his fingers around hers, carefully, the way he did everything, and they stood in the library of Ironvale Keep while the kingdom settled around them, and the documents on the table held their truths in the candlelight, and she felt something in her chest that had been wound tight for years simply, finally, let go. In the months that followed, the council investigation concluded. Aldrich Voss was stripped of title and lands, tried before the full council for the documented poisoning of Seren of Ashenmere and the unlawful suppression of the Blood Compact, and exiled to the Western Territories under permanent restriction from any position of governance. The regional healer who had filed the true death record under Voss's instruction, and who had preserved it for 17 years at personal risk, was formally recognized for that act before the council. The Blood Compact of Ashenmere was upheld, expanded, and reaffirmed. Finn spent the following year working with the council record keepers to document every unaffiliated Omega in the Northern Territories who had been living without protection, a task he described in letters to Maisie as the most important work he had ever done, and also the most disorganized archive he had ever encountered. The 2 observations delivered in equal proportion. Roderick, Bram, and Cale remained at Ironvale Keep. Roderick grew into the alpha he had always promised to be, steadier than he was stubborn, though the stubbornness never entirely left. Bram and Cale learned every knot Maisie knew and invented several she had not considered. They were placed, in time, with pack families who had petitioned the crown for wardship, families chosen with care and patience, and on the morning each of them left the keep, they said goodbye in their particular ways. Bram with a long hug that he would later deny, Cale with the cord from their first knot lesson tied around her wrist, Roderick with a single nod that carried everything he did not yet have words for. Maisie kept the cord. She became Luna of Ironvale in the ceremony of the spring moon, a quiet ceremony by royal standards, attended by Finn and Ren and Beork and Oswin the archivist, who cried in the dignified manner of a man who was not crying. Evander placed the Luna's mark at her wrist, with the same steadiness he brought to everything, and when he looked at her, it was with the look of a man who had waited without demanding, and arrived without fanfare, and intended simply to remain. She wore her mother's name in the ceremony record, not as a ghost, as a foundation. The quiet sight did not leave her. It did not become simple or painless. It came when it chose, in dreams and in the quality of certain silences, and it showed her things she sometimes wished she had not seen, and sometimes was grateful beyond measure to know. She had stopped deciding it was coincidence, She had stopped deciding she was not what she was. What she was, she had finally understood, was exactly enough. The morning after the ceremony, she stood at the high window of the library with a clay cup of chamomile warm in both hands, and the autumn light coming in low and gold across the shelves and the documents, and the Riverstone map weights, and the life she had built in the rubble of the one that had been taken from her. And she felt the mate bond in her chest like something that had always been there, simply waiting to be chosen. She had chosen it. It had been the least reckless thing she had ever done.